Okay, well, you guys, I'm super excited to welcome our first guest speaker of the semester, and so grateful to call her a friend. So, Lindsay Hadley was a global social impact consultant for her own firm called Hadley Impact Consulting for over a decade, and has raised more than $50 million directly for her clients and leveraged billions of dollars for causes through her campaigns and events. She was a founding member, chief development officer, and executive producer of Global Citizen Festival, and is the executive producer for a film called Uncharitable featuring Ed Norton, which I was just going to show you, but you can go watch that on your own. She is currently executive producer for several other film projects and television shows, which led her to become co-founder of Harbor Media Fund, a nonprofit that leverages donor dollars for social impact feature films. She was a visiting professor at BYU Hawaii teaching social entrepreneurship and lives part of the year on the North Shore of Oahu. Lindsay is currently the Director of Client Relations and in-house philanthropic advisor for Capita Financial Network. She's the mother of 3 boys, I think one of whom is joining us here today. Yes, shout out. Future Badger right there, maybe. And the wife of a loving and supportive husband. Lindsay prizes family and personal relationships over everything else. So please welcome Lindsay Hadley.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. So lovely to meet you. So this is your first day back to school? Yeah? Second week. Okay. First time having an outside lecture. So I'm going to talk a little bit about me, and it doesn't feel very long ago that I felt like I was your guys' age, sitting in college, trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grow up. I still want to kind of find out what I'm going to be when I grow up, but I'm so thrilled to be able to share with you guys a little bit about my journey, some lessons I've learned along the way as an entrepreneur, and somebody who's chosen to pursue a career where there was major social impact involved. I cared a lot more about having purpose and making sure that I was doing something I really believed in that brought me a lot of joy spiritually and emotionally than I did money. And later in life, I'm going to talk a little bit about how marrying those two is a fun idea because, spoiler alert, you can have incredible impact and make a lot of money. That's actually a thing you can do. And it takes a ton of creativity. It takes a lot of hard work, but it's totally doable in the world. So this is a picture of me when I was probably about your guys' age, just in college and doing humanitarian work. My first job right out of college was I worked for a nonprofit that did boots on the ground type humanitarian work, putting in clean water wells in schools and medical dispensaries. And how I got that job, it was my dream job. I really wanted to be able to travel the world. And I was going to places like Mexico, Thailand, Peru, Kenya, and getting to do all this great service work. But I actually got this job by interning. I highly recommend while you guys are in school, if you're going to get credits anyway, and you're spending the money to get the credits, and you have to get this piece of paper and get certified, get an internship in the field you want to. And I cannot emphasize that enough. I don't know all the programs, meet with your counselors or talk to your professors, all that they offer you, but the more specialized it is in what you want to do, the better. Like, it's better to have a job in that industry than honestly be in classes in school. So to get real work experience is just critical. Oftentimes you need to have the classroom experience to get the jobs, but anytime you can hack that and do both, that's a killer hack. So in my early career, I remember I started doing fundraising and event production and concerts and music festivals. This is my first music festival I ever did. I started out doing concerts because I was married really young, and I got pregnant with my son Milo, who's now 16, and I didn't want to trek these malaria-ridden jungles anymore. This idea of, having a baby that was nursing and having to go to these remote places in the world where they'd never seen white people, and for me to come in and be exposed with this newborn, I was like, oh, I got to shift my thoughts. And so I started doing fundraising and event production, and I found that I had a real knack for it. And when I was your guys' age, I joined a service club called Rotaract. Do you guys have a Rotaract here on campus? It's the youth service version of Rotary International, or like Kiwanis Club. You guys ever heard of it? So it was a service club, and I became the president of that service club. And the interesting thing is, I think that most of these events, they would do like an annual fundraiser. Most of these clubs, they would do an annual fundraiser. And like the year before me, they sold like boxed oranges and raised like $5,000 or something, or $6,000. And then I was like, we're going to do a concert. And this will date me, but I was like, we're going to have Ben Folds, who was like an artist back in the day, Ben Folds 5. You guys are all too young for that, but Russ knows. Russ knows. Anyway, and so I convinced all my friends to help do it. It was like totally audacious. And we put on this amazing epic concert. And we raised $100,000 for clean water wells. And as a result, Rotary International flew me to Birmingham, England, and gave me this award because it was the most money in history that a Rotaract club had ever raised or whatever. So I learned really young that like putting on these events where it was like fun and kind of sexy and also like everybody enjoyed it really, really was enjoyable for me. So I ended up doing that for a little while. And then I tried my first music festival. Candlelight Serenade Acoustic Festival was my first time trying to do it where there was multiple music artists. And again, you guys probably won't know these artists, but this will again date me. We had artists like 311 and Third Eye Blind and Dashboard Confessional. I think you guys might know Neon Trees. They were our opening act. Nobody even heard of them before. And so we had a concert in Thanksgiving Point, and we tried to raise a bunch of money. And this was my first time doing a music festival. And crazy enough, it was an epic failure. So we had to break even with these tickets. We had to sell like 9,000 tickets and only 5,000 tickets sold. And I had never worked harder on anything in my entire life. And I think I was like 24, 25 years old. No, yeah, I would have been about 25 years old. I was so stressed. I remember like the month leading up to the concert, the tickets weren't like being sold quickly. And I was like going around like hustling the streets, like just a psychopath trying to like sell these tickets as if I could get 4,000 tickets on my own sold. It was devastating. It was one of the most stressful things at that point in my life I'd ever been through. And that night I came home at 3 a.m. after like literally there was 100, you guys, it was a nonprofit that I was working for as the executive director of. And the vendors needed their payments and we just didn't have enough money to pay. So the board of my nonprofit had to write a $100,000 check because we were $100,000 in debt. So here I was raising $100,000, like thinking I was hot stuff. And I tried something more audacious and now we're $100,000 in debt, a different charity. I was devastated. I came home and I fell prostrate on the ground in my floor. My family had been sleeping. I felt like I hadn't seen them in like 2 months. And I was just bawling my eyes out. And I thought, what am I thinking? What kind of audacity? Why did I think I could do this? I was so embarrassed. I'm like, these are sacred friends. Everybody followed me into this, off this cliff. Like, what am I going to do? How am I going to make this right? Like these board members now, we're a charity and we're at $100,000 into debt. And I was the only employee. I had gotten thousands of volunteers to put this thing on. I think it was a couple hundred, but it felt like thousands. But ultimately, like, I just was devastated. And I remember hearing like a voice inside, and I believe it was God. I believe in God. And I heard, pick yourself up, make things go right. This isn't about you. And it was like humbling because I thought, what is this about me? I didn't think I was making it about me, but I absolutely was. In this moment of despair, I was thinking about what people thought of me, my failures, my insecurities. Like I just was beating myself. It was actually very self-focused instead of trying to figure out my responsibility. And so I went to bed totally exhausted. And the next morning I woke up and I thought, I don't know how to make things go right. I don't even know what went wrong. The other concerts I'd done made money. This was a failure. And so interestingly enough, I ended up getting up and I made some breakfast and I fed little Milo his baby food and and his brother too. And I sat down and I thought, you know what? I need a mentor. Like, it was kind of the blind leading the blind. My friend who did concerts also produced this festival with me. We'd always been successful in our concerts, but this festival had failed. And so I realized we didn't know what we were doing. And I was like Googling, what's the most successful music festival in history? And it's Coachella. Oh, did it just die? Okay, so Coachella. So anybody have been to Coachella or heard of it? So Coachella is in Indio Valley in California. It sells out 2 weekends of 75,000 tickets. So that's 150,000 tickets in less than an hour, a year before the event, with no mention of a single artist. I could be the performer and people are buying tickets. That's how strong the brand of this festival has become. And so I was like Googling, who produces Coachella? Who are the founders of Coachella? And I find this company and I look at them and I'm like, okay, who are the people behind it? And I find like some random info email. Here's a little tip. I saw there were 2 founders. There was a guy named Paul Tillett and a guy named Bill Fold. Not to be confused with Ben Folds that played at my first concert, but Bill Fold. And I recognized that Paul was in all of these interviews and kind of a public figure and often, like kind of the face of the organization. Little tip is the number two person that nobody really sees is often the person getting everything done. So if the person that's really public, it's not always, but oftentimes it's people that are the integrators and the operators that are like really in the minutia of details of like execution that are more available to connect with than the person that is in the limelight because everybody wants to try to track them. Does that make sense? So I send an info to Bill Fold and I say at their email and I'm like, hi, I'm just this little stay-at-home mom and I did this charity concert and it like totally failed and I'm so bummed. And I was super vulnerable. I was like, I wonder if I could have just 15 minutes of your time. I know I need to make things go right. Our charity's now in debt and I don't know what I did wrong, but you're the best in the world. And I just thought, even if you don't have time, if you can refer me to somebody who might be able to give me some advice, I have no idea what I did. So he called me, which is an amazing gift. I want you guys to remember this. Like when you're successful one day and anywhere relative in your life, you might have younger people than you or people that to you think they can do nothing for me. But he called me when I could do nothing for him. And he gave me his time, which was so invaluable. So Bill called me on the phone and he said, hi, it's Bill. And he starts to ask me questions about this failure of an event, which by the way, this is super, I don't know if this is maybe too inappropriate, but my friends looked up, there's a thing called Urban Dictionary. Is that still around for your generation? I feel so old right now. And Candlelight Serenade, we found out later, that was the name we came up for. It means quick, swift in the balls from behind, quick, swift kick in the balls from behind. That's what it means. And it felt like that to us. So we were really struggling and stressed about this experience. And I told him how much I'd screwed up. And he was like, holy cow, your first year, all you went into was $100,000 in deficit at your first music festival. That's remarkable, which was shocking to me. He said, Lindsay, the average music festival, 95% of them lose money the first 3 years. Coachella lost money the first 10 years. And now we turn down $30 million in sponsorships every year. He explained to me why that was, that you brand the event itself, not all of the artists. Whereas when you do an individual show, you actually brand, you're trading on the affinity and the value of the brand of the artist, if that makes sense. And so you're building like relationship with community and it's a different kind of strategy and marketing. And I should have built in there had I known that it would have lost money for a couple of years. So that was really encouraging. And he says to me, he goes, you know what? I'm setting up for Stagecoach, which is like the Coachella of country music. And he said, do you want to come down and meet me? And I was like, Michael Jordan of the thing I'm trying to do wants to meet me? Yes. So I jumped on a plane. So there's another thing is like, take these opportunities. If somebody extends himself, like show up. Like I didn't really have the money to just jump on a last minute flight or whatever, but I did it. And so I showed up to him. And one of the perks of being a music festival producer is you often get your own golf cart, which is super dope. So he pulls up on his golf cart and he's like, hey, jump in. And I remember he had a little Jack Russell Terrier dog that had a credential VIP. You know how you can get into events with the credentials? And his name was Mr. Rico. And I was like, did we just become best friends? Because this dog had a credential. That's so dope. So anyway, Bill Fold ends up becoming my mentor. He shows me around and shows me what he built. He shows me why and how they were successful. And he gives me this time and I just soaked every minute up. And I was like, I want to create so much value for this guy one day because he's giving me all this attention and time. Fast forward and I moved to Australia where my husband and I lived. And I got cold called from this organization, a little nonprofit called the Global Poverty Project I'd never heard of. And they said, can you come? We heard you're like a charity concert lady, that you've done a lot of charity concerts. Can you actually come and help us produce an event in polio? And actually, before I jump here, I forgot this other part of the story, is that the following month, I put on a fundraiser to try to raise money for the debt that I had in this charity, which was so discouraging. Can you guys imagine trying to raise money for debt? Oh, we have to pay back the people because of the thing. I mean, it was terrible. So I had to come up with something. I'm LDS, so I didn't know anything about poker, but a friend of mine's like, I know the world's best poker player. And so we put on a poker night. I was like, please God, forgive me for my sins. But we put on a charity poker night. And I didn't know anything I was doing. And the charity event raised $80,000, which, by the way, nobody cared if it went to debt. They weren't asking those questions. They came to play poker or whatever, which, by the way, was pretty decent for a little event or for somebody to know what they were doing. But amazingly, a woman that I had met at the Quick, Swift, and the Balls from Behind event, actually, her name was Malia. She brought a gentleman named Sumner Redstone, a multi-billionaire and the chairman of Viacom. Viacom owns a third of all of Hollywood. Nickelodeon, CBS, Disney, the Paramount Pictures, it's crazy. So anyway, he shows up to the event. He comes in and he had been in a fire. He was he had a crutch and a cane. And he was like everything intimidating to somebody like me from Utah. He was a Jewish media mogul from his 80s. And he was just like so stern, and he was like a titan of industry, and he just did not care to make friends. He was like, give me the microphone. And I went over and I gave him the microphone, and he's like, and he read this thing he'd written up about why he cared about this charity that was combating anti-trafficking, which, by the way, way before anybody had heard about it, before the movie Taken, it was something that was like really, we were on the cutting edge of like trying to build that movement. And he reads his statement about how this should never happen, and he's making his commitment. And he hands me in front of everyone his check, handwritten, for $1 million. And I was standing, you guys, sobbing, like not a cute Kodak moment, like, thank you, sir. I was sobbing like, because he just freed me from this debt. He also just like gave me so much hope. And what's so amazing about that is that the most incredible part is that I learned something powerful, is if you let your failures be a part of your ultimate success, by actually picking yourself up and make things go right and not make it about you, I promise you, it might not happen that quickly. That was like the next event. But over time, you can actually turn these failures into the pivotal moments of the learning, the relationships, and the people that get you to your ultimate success. And everybody who's ever been successful will tell you that failure led them to the pivots and the decisions and the people that got them to success. So the keep going idea, that's not a platitude, it's very real. So I'm in Australia, and I get asked to do this festival, and this young guy named Mick Sheldrick calls me, and he's pitching me why I should come help them put on a concert to end polio. And I'm like, polio? Isn't that already eradicated? Like, why polio? And he's like, listen, we're gonna end polio, which then puts all of this money towards other things in the sector, because unlike most things, you can't cross it off and be done. We can actually eradicate this disease. We've done it only at one time as human beings, which is ending smallpox. It's like landing on the moon type stuff. And we all just lived through a pandemic. We know what infectious diseases can do. But everybody has been vaccinated in America and in first world countries like Australia. But the rest of the world, there's a couple places left. There was only four countries at the time that were endemic. There was India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Nigeria. And at $1 per vaccine, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, Rotary International, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have been beating back for 25 years this infectious disease of polio that's devastating. Did anybody have grandparents with polio? Okay, so a lot of either your great-grandparents or grandparents would either know somebody or possibly had it themselves. It was their COVID, but way worse, because it ended up people were in iron lungs. They actually impacted more people than COVID did. But it was so incredible. And so I was like, okay, but tell me more about this event. How much money do you guys have? How big is your team? How much time? He's like, oh, we're going to do it on the eve of CHUGM, which is the Commonwealth Dignitary Meeting for all of the Commonwealth leaders. So prime ministers, presidents, the Queen of England, they were all converging to meet about social agendas. And they said, we want to put this concert on. And he goes, it's in 4 months. I'm like, 4 months? You need like a year runway for music festivals. And he's like, okay, well, I said, how big's your team? He's like, there's 6 of us. I'm like, how old are you all? They're like, we're all in college. I was older than all of them, just out of college. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then he's like, I'm like, please tell me you have a lot of money. No, we have no money. We were hoping you could like raise the money for your own salary. And I was about to hang up on this guy, and he's, wait, but we have Hugh Jackman. And I was like, Hugh Jackman? Tell me more. It's okay, you guys. My husband has a married crush on him too. So ultimately, I was like, you got Hugh Jackman? He's like, yeah, he really believes in what we're trying to do. And so I start listening, but actually the real thing that got me, besides name dropping Hugh Jackman, is that he said, we're going to do something totally innovative that we've never seen before in the nonprofit sector. We're going to rely upon this constituency of the people that attend the concert. We're going to gamify their engagement. We're going to have them sign a petition. And then when they do, we'll actually take it to show the politician, who at the time was the Prime Minister of Australia, a woman named Julia Gillard. And we're going to say, hey, your voters want you to give to polio out of the foreign aid budget. Which, by the way, as jaded as you get about politics, in any kind of democracy, we, the people, are their employers. They lose their jobs if they don't listen to us. That is the truth. So he's like, we're going to show them that their voters want that, but we're going to do it by incentivizing for a ticket to come see a concert. And I was like, that's kind of genius. And he's like, then there'll be top-down commitments. And then Bill Gates has already earmarked $1 per vaccine for every dollar that's put in from a government. So anything we raise from this, Bill Gates will match. I'm like, that's pretty freaking brilliant. So we get to double the money. So I go and jump and build my parachute on the way down with this group of a couple of us, 6 of us at the very beginning. And we ended up getting John Legend to come out to Perth, Australia. And we ended up having Hugh Jackman and a bunch of other celebrities from Australia and other people. And we had 30,000 petitions signed in less than a week, which got us this opportunity to pitch the Prime Minister of Australia, which Mick who was our 23-year-old policy expert, ended up pitching the most rehearsed pitch of his life where he said, here's why you should give to polio, here's what your voters want, and by the way, Hugh Jackman's involved, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And so she's like, okay. So the following morning after our concert, she holds this press conference and announces her funding commitment alongside the Canadian and the Prime Minister of the UK for a total of $118 million for polio eradication. And I was sitting on the front row, like just one row in from the front row, behind a couple people. And I remember her announcing this. And I was hoping we would raise like 10 million because she'd give 5 and then Gates would match it. Hers was 50 plus the UK and Canada came in a little bit more. And so Bill Gates matched it. It was $118 million. At $118 million, it's $1 per vaccine, and 118 million people have been vaccinated. We no longer have polio in India. And our little team of 6 were able to do that. And we did this by a couple strategies that I'm going to talk about today, which is called the convener model. So this is Global Citizen. This is a little bird's eye view of 60,000 people on the Great Lawn. It's broadcast to 33 million people. It's in New York City. And we decided to take this concept of leveraging top-down commitment from governments and corporate sponsors and high net worth people and having the public be the voice that makes the demand. We decided to basically do that same thing, but triple down on it and take it to the world's oyster. And we did it during the United Nations General Assembly meeting, which is coming up here in a couple weeks. I go every year. I've been for 12 years. And we go and we put this event on, and the world's biggest artists, we've had Beyonce and Coldplay and Ed Sheeran. This year we got Posty and Doja Cat and whoever else. There's always somebody amazing. We end up putting these events on, and then all kinds of celebrities come up on stage, and we leverage top-down commitments from governments, and we've leveraged over $30 billion in the course of the last decade. This first year is the picture you're seeing here, and as executive producer, I remember being backstage and just blown away when we reached $1.2 billion for the world's poor from that evening. So it changed the trajectory of my life. I ended up realizing there were different ways to do things in charity, and also put me in access to people that growing up in a tiny town similar to this. Anyone know where Camas, Utah is? Anyone know? What? Nice. So I grew up in Bub Park City in a little tiny small town. I didn't know anybody. I had no network, no connections. I didn't get any of this from my parents. It was just putting one foot in front of the other, hustling, networking, providing value. And it was just also the grace of God. And I ended up having this amazing access to some of the most powerful people in the entertainment industry, high net worth people, and people in government. So as executive producer of Global Citizen, some amazing things we learned was, if you get behind others, they will get behind you. You have to think of creating value first. So the idea was, we ended up not asking celebrities to come to our concert. We ended up saying, here's this umbrella called Ending Extreme Poverty. And you, Alicia Keys, who performed our first year, you care about malaria and combating malaria in Africa. And we're going to let you get up on stage and talk about your charity and what you care about. Selena Gomez, you're an ambassador for UNICEF. You get up on stage and talk about UNICEF. And we gamified these tickets. All 60,000 people earned their tickets by taking actions on our platform called globalcitizen.org. And they signed petitions, shared videos, volunteered, donated, bought cool products that supported these causes. And they earned points and then redeemed them to win concert tickets. So does anybody remember, you guys too young to remember the Got Milk commercial? Russ Will? Yeah, some of you got some nods? Nice. Okay, basically it was a commercial where a bunch of celebrities, athletes, and business leaders that were high profile would have a milk mustache and they'd say, Got Milk. And it was just kind of this kitschy thing, and they had billboards and whatever. This Got Milk commercial wasn't one milk brand. It wasn't True Moo, it wasn't Horizon Milk. It was the entire milk industry at large getting together and encouraging consumers to drink more milk. They band their resources together, and they saturated the market with one message. And like a rising tide, all boats come up. This idea of the convener model, or meta campaigning, or shared resources, is something that you can use in any sector, in any business, in any situation in your life. It's basically something we all know is a dumb, smart idea, which is that we can do a lot more when we do it together. The problem is, especially in the nonprofit sector, most people are viciously competing for limited resources. They're viciously competing for credit, and they can't check their egos and their logos at the door. So what we did, and I made an entire career out of it, I built a little agency called Hadley Impact Consulting, where I did this for biggest brands, the most famous people on earth, governments, the Vatican. I mean, basically for 10 years, I helped people build convener model campaigns and events where I got to basically play a sophisticated choir conductor, if you will, and get everyone to sing the same song. So they could saturate the market and all be louder together instead of singing as solos. Does that make sense? So I'm going to give you little case studies quickly of examples of this. So this is the Beyond Right and Wrong campaign. This was a woman named Leka Singh in the green here, next to Larry King. And that is Nelson Mandela's grandson. Leka came to me in 2015 when I just launched my little consultancy, because after a couple years of being executive producer of Global Citizen, I was getting headhunted by so many people, A-list celebrities, ultra high net worth families, corporations, multinational NGOs, all these great groups that were like, can you come be our chief development officer? Will you come work for us? And I quite frankly wanted to work with all of them. So I built a little boutique agency and I took them all as clients. And so I did that for 10 years, working with these different groups. So the diversity of the projects and things we did were really extensive and amazing. This woman was a billionaire and she made her first documentary. It was called Beyond Right and Wrong. And it was stories of people whose loved ones were murdered in very extreme conflicts, like Palestine and Israel, like Northern Ireland, like Rwanda. And she showed family members who forgave the killers of their family and showed this extreme reconciliation work being done around the world. She came to me and said, I want you to promote my documentary. And I didn't know the first thing about how to promote a documentary. I'd never promoted a documentary. I told her that. And she said, Lindsay, I don't care. I want the way you think about partnerships and the whole convener model thing. I can see you're just doing so much impact this way. I want you to think like that. So we ended up building a thing called Film Raise, where we had different major charities that all are combating any kind of war or anybody who's doing peace and reconciliation. Okay, so basically, I have to go quick. I'm long-winded. So basically, we ended up having Nelson Mandela Foundation and Malala Fund and Desmond Tutu, and look at Hugh Jackman tweeting, woohoo. What we did is we ended up getting them all to get behind this film because the film got behind them. We raised $500,000, and for every view they got online, they would get paid. And so we had them all promoting this one thing because they could have a friendly competition for this prize pot of funding. So it got over 1 billion media impressions with all of these different media outlets because the strategy was so unique. And like a rising tide, everybody won from that. This is an event we did with Imagine Dragons. Similarly, we launched an app, and that app had 30 plus charities. It was all around kids with critical illnesses. It was called Time Machine, and people could go out and spend their time volunteering for kids whose time is cut short because they have life-threatening diseases and illnesses, and people could earn rewards, and this whole gamification, finding out what's in it for everybody, the participants, the artists, the sponsors, thinking that kind of way. This is one we did called Influence Trips. We had a bunch of social media influencers, and they would get their fans to come with them on trips to developing countries to basically be involved in helping drive awareness for tourism. And these poor countries like Guatemala and places like Zimbabwe, they couldn't afford to pay these influencers a lot to come and make content so that we want to go to these places. But travel tourism boards like Dubai, they do that all the time. That's why everyone's like, I want to go there. Oh my gosh, I saw how epic it was because some influencer was posting content of their travel. These poor countries didn't have much budgets. So what we did is we created this strategy where they would have their fans come with them, and the fans made enough profit in bulk at 30 people with profit margins to pay for the influencers' expenses. And then all we did was just partner with amplification for the governments and getting access to experiences you couldn't get. So constantly thinking about extremely different ways of helping. This is one we did during the pandemic, the How Are You Really campaign with Kenneth Cole, where we had a bunch of celebrities and 50 plus charities all get together to address the destigmatization of mental health because the crisis text hotline had 3 times more inbound suicidal ideation calls. Orphan Myth is with vulnerable children. You guys are getting the point. This is I'll just share one more really quick. So refugees, so this is, you probably are listening, you're like, well, that sounds great, lady. You got Hugh Jackman and you have all these billionaires and you have all these famous people. Yeah, it sounds like you can do some really great stuff. Well, I'll give you an example before all this. My sister worked for an organization called the Catholic Community Services, and it was a refugee resettlement group where they would bring refugees in who had fled through legal asylum to come to America based on conflict. And these refugees needed a job within 6 months or they would end up being cut off from government, and it's very scary, precarious situation. And her job for the nonprofit was to go find people who would hire these refugees. By the way, this is pre-Syria crisis in 2015. This is back in 2010 when people heard refugee and they thought it was an illegal immigrant. And so nobody was hiring refugees, more people weren't interested. She had to go in and convince them why these guys have Nobel Prize winning. These are doctors and lawyers. They just had to leave their country. They just don't speak English. They just haven't assimilated in our culture. And they're not a threat. And this is a good thing. And she had to really do a lot of legwork. Well, she did so good at her job that she got Walmart to agree to hire 30 refugees. It was the single biggest hire in Utah at that time for refugees ever. There were 4 charities who were competing for this kind of work. Asian Association, IRC, which is the International Rescue Committee, and a group called the Utah Refugee Coalition, and then hers, which is the Catholic Community Services. Well, she thought of something really amazing. She thought, if I do what's best for refugees, it'll be what's best for my client in the long run, her employer. So sometimes you got to use a little stick and not, or if you can't use carrot. And she actually goes, hey, Walmart, this is your idea, okay? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Walmart. You want to hire the 30 best refugees in the state. You don't care which agency it comes from, okay? That's your idea? And Walmart was like, yeah, we want the 30 best refugees in the state. So they had to bring all of the agencies together and present their best refugee candidates. Walmart hired 30. 10 of them went for her organization, the other 20 were from the others, okay? Well, her employer was like, what? Well, she's like, it's Walmart's idea, I don't know, I mean, okay, so guess what happened? Walmart was so happy with the performance of these 30 best candidates. The following year, Walmart hired 370 refugees, and every single agency had their quota met in the first quarter of the following year. This works, this is dumb smart, it's God math. This really cool rabbi from 2,000 years ago, he said, the first shall be last and the last shall be first in all things. This idea that you can actually get behind others, they get behind you. If you're other-centric, you can make things work that are like miracles. So how much time are we at, Russ? Are we 5 minutes? Perfect. Okay, so the movie Uncharitable, this is kind of a fast forward into my career now, and I'll just end with saying, after 10 years of doing this consultancy work, I've moved into filmmaking now, and I executive produce films and documentaries and TV shows. This is my first film. It's called Uncharitable. You can watch on Amazon, shameless plug, Amazon and Apple. But it's about nonprofit work, and it is about the demonization of overhead and limiting nonprofits, that they can't use the same levers that the private sector used to be successful every day. They can't hire the best talent because that's paying people too much. They can't spend money on marketing because that's waste and overhead. And they can't take risk, something that we know is critical to actually accomplish anything. So in the private sector, we know those things are incredibly critical, and yet we have the nonprofits have a different set of rules, and they have to tie their arms back behind their arms behind their back and don't allow them to solve the greatest societal ills. We're making them do with basically the cheapest available Band-Aid. This documentary goes into that. If you don't want to watch a whole documentary, you can watch a TED Talk. It's 13 minutes long by Dan Pallotta called The Way We Think of Charity is Dead Wrong. And it's all about this subject matter. And we'll definitely, in fact, in our documentary, the CEO of TED, Chris Henderson says on screen, it's the most persuasive talk in the history of TED stages. So I recommend you check it out. And logically, I feel like that maybe makes our documentary the most persuasive documentary in the history of documentaries. But anyway, this is the rising tide lifts all boats concept. I know I came late and I'm trying to fire hose you with information, but the main thing if you leave here today is just to remember that when you think in a way that zooms yourself out and gets out of your own prerogative and needs, and you can look at the ecosystem of people around you and like, how can I do something that's of service to the greater whole? You end up becoming the aggregate reach of all of that reach, and you end up having tremendous power. And the first shall be last, and the last shall be first in all things. So if you guys want to check out Harbor, this is Harbor Fund, which is my new film fund, and all these social impact films, which we're now doing. Richard Branson, who's the founder of Virgin, he's not in his boxers, that's swimming, we're at his island. We're partnered together to produce the first ever film festival at Necker Island, and we're raising money from donors and philanthropists to make films that have the biggest available impact, that are scripted, things like Blood Diamond and Aaron Brockovich and the movie Taken and Schindler's List, movies that really make us think about causes in a new way. And you guys can learn more about Harbor if you check it out online. So anyway, sorry, I was so fire hosing you.
That's great. Thank you so much.
No worries. Questions? Thank you. Okay, what are two questions Russ says? Any questions? Nothing? Are you sure? You got one? By the way, you were wondering about Hugh Jackman. We're friends. He ended up becoming my client. He's the man. Have you seen him in Deadpool 3? Anyway, just kidding. I'm just playing. But no, he really was a huge support to us in the beginning. But you know, over our career, we've been able to work with really high profile people. And what's really fun is if you guys ever want to get to people that are like, man, they would be, I can't imagine them being mentors or partners or access or celebrity engagement or whatever. Find out everything you can about what would bring them value and show up as Santa Claus, not as a beggar. And I promise you, you'll have crazy success. Any other questions? I have nobody asked question. Yeah, Russ.
So So why film? How do you turn somebody watching a movie into action towards a cause?
So it's a great question. Film, I believe the stories that we tell ourselves are the most powerful things we do. Everything, you guys, even our currency, our economic system is based on a story. The idea that this piece of paper is valuable and meaningful is a story we bought into and agreed to. Everything you do every day, your way of being, if you believe, nobody cares, I'm not effective, that story will come to life if you believe it. If you're like, no, I can do anything, I just have to be humble and get the right people, and I have to make things go right and not make it about me, then you will accomplish things beyond your wildest dreams. So as far as I can see, documentaries, they've been leveraging philanthropic dollars since before I was born to make them. And I would argue that films, narrative films that have our biggest, kings and queens of Hollywood culture, in them, more people watch them, more commercially viable and more scalable. And so that's what we're trying to put philanthropic dollars into now. And how we get people involved is if you prick them emotionally and they get engaged, they can then move into engagement. Like the movie Blunt Diamond, anybody seen that movie? You guys are all so young. See, we're gonna make new movies like this. Anybody seen Lion or Slumdog Millionaire? Yeah, so it's, after watching that movie, you're like, oh my gosh, the plight of people living in abject poverty and vulnerable children. And if there was a QR code at the end or somebody could go, oh, I can take action or get involved or, they're pushed towards some engagement. That's the hope, Russ. Yeah. Any other questions? You guys need to go? Oh, yeah.
What do you think helped you develop a mindset of creating value from this first?
That's a great question. I think it was just so effective. I actually just naturally really love people. And so I probably had some codependency and, it's the whole thing, intergenerational trauma. Anybody else going to therapy? And I was like, oh, everybody else what they need. Yeah. Anybody else what they need? And I'm trying to be hyper vigilant about getting their needs met so that my needs can get met, right? So it's probably innate in me. But over time, it's just like a beautiful way to show up, because as long as you don't self-betray, that is codependent, that's dysfunctional. As long as you don't self-betray, and you can really be like, I know that I have goals, but I'm going to put them aside while I really take inventory of what you need to accomplish, and where those Venn diagrams hit, that's where the money is made. And that's where the impact has happened. That's where it's like dreams come true, relationships and partnerships. So I think it's something that probably came from wounding, like most of us. You guys, your greatest strengths with fear attached are your weaknesses. And your greatest weaknesses with love attached are your greatest strengths. So if you look at them, it's always the case. So being hypervigilant about what other people want when done in love makes me super effective to collaborate and create partnerships and accomplish big things that I couldn't do ever alone. Thanks for asking that question.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.